We often hear the claim that society is held together by a thread, and that thread is religion. The fear is specific. Take away the church, the temple, or the mosque, and you take away the village. Without a higher power to watch over us, the argument goes, we have no reason to look out for one another. It suggests that human connection is artificial, something that had to be imposed from the top down to keep us from tearing each other apart. But if you look at how human beings actually function, you see that the arrow points the other direction. We didn't learn to be social because we found religion. We invented religion because we were already social. Go back to the very beginning of our species. Long before anyone carved a totem or looked up at the stars and named a god, we were banding together. We had to. A lone human in the wild is a dead human. We have no claws, our teeth are flat, and we run slower than almost everything that wants to eat us. Our only survival strategy was the group. We shared food, we watched each other's backs, and we raised children collectively. This wasn't a moral choice derived from a holy book. It was a biological imperative. The brain reflects this. We are hardwired for empathy. When you see someone in pain, the same centers in your brain light up as if you were hurting. That is the hardware of community. It existed hundreds of thousands of years before the first scripture was written. Religion eventually came along and co-opted this machinery. It took the natural evolutionary urge to belong and gave it a name and a story. It was a powerful tool for organizing larger groups, sure. Once you get past the number of people you can know personally, usually around 150, you need a shared story to keep things running. Religion provided that story. It turned the tribe into the civilization. But we make a mistake when we confuse the tool with the mechanic. The tool is the dogma. The mechanic is human nature. When we strip away the supernatural elements, we find that the engine of community is still running. You see this in disaster zones. When an earthquake hits or a flood sweeps through a town, people don't check religious affiliations before pulling neighbors out of the rubble. They don't pause to consult a theology textbook to see if saving a stranger is the right thing to do. They just act. That impulse is older than any god. It is the baseline of being a social primate. The worry that community collapses without religion assumes that religion is the source of our goodness. It ignores the fact that cooperation is a survival strategy that pays off. Game theory shows us that in repeated interactions with others, cooperation beats selfishness. If you cheat your neighbor today, he won't help you hunt tomorrow. You don't need a commandment to understand that. You just need to understand consequences. We are seeing a shift now where the old structures are falling away and people are panicking. They look at empty pews and assume it means empty lives, but look closer at where people are actually finding connection. They find it in shared struggle, in unions, in sports, in artistic scenes, in volunteer corps. These are communities bound by reality, not mythology. They are bound by a common goal or a common passion. The challenge isn't that we can't form bonds without a deity. The challenge is that we have spent so long relying on religious institutions to do the heavy lifting of organizing us that we have forgotten how to build these structures ourselves. We got lazy. We let the institutions manage the weekly gathering, the charitable giving, and the moral instruction. Now that those institutions are losing their grip, we aren't losing the capacity for community. We are just realizing we have to be the architects of it. If we are being honest about how religious communities function, we have to admit they often come with a heavy price tag. The traditional religious community is incredibly effective at binding people together, but it does so by drawing a sharp circle. There is the in-group, and there is the out-group. You are a brother or a sister as long as you believe the right things, say the right words, and follow the right rules. The moment you step outside those lines, the warmth of that community can turn freezing cold. This is the conditional nature of religious belonging. It creates a fragile sort of solidarity. It looks strong from the outside, but it is often held together by conformity rather than genuine connection. People stay not because they feel deeply understood, but because they fear being cut off. This isn't true community. It's a hostage situation disguised as a potluck. Secular communities have the potential to be far more robust because they don't require you to suspend your critical thinking or suppress your identity to fit in. In a secular context, diversity of thought isn't a heresy. It's just a conversation. When you remove the requirement for doctrinal purity, you open the door for connections based on who people actually are, not who they are pretending to be. There is a psychological term called identity fusion. It happens when a person's personal identity becomes completely porous with the group identity. Religion is a master at this. It dissolves the self into the collective. While that can feel euphoric, it is dangerous. It creates a hive mind where the group can justify almost anything in the name of the cause. We see this in history time and again. The most cohesive religious communities were often the ones marching to war or burning heretics. A community without religion has to work harder to find its glue, that is true. It doesn't have the shortcut of, because God said so. It has to rely on, because this is good for us. This requires negotiation. It requires empathy. It requires listening. These are harder skills to master than blind obedience, but they build a foundation that is much more stable in the long run. We also have to talk about the God gap in social capital. For a long time, the church was the only place in town where you could get a safety net. If you were sick, the church ladies brought food. If you were poor, the collection plate helped you out. This created a dependency loop. You had to participate in the religion to get the insurance of the community. But as we build better social systems, healthcare, social security, public education, the church stops being the only game in town. We don't need the priest to educate our children or the parish to heal our sick. This liberates community. It means that when we do come together, we are doing it because we want to, not because we are desperate. The communities forming now in the absence of religion are fascinating because they are modular. We don't have one giant community that dictates everything from our diet to our politics. We have networks. You might have a community for your professional life, one for your hobbies, one for your neighborhood. This resilience is key. If one falls apart, you don't lose your entire support system. In the old model, leaving your faith often meant losing your friends, your family, and your safety net all at once. That is a catastrophic design flaw. We are moving toward a model of liquid community. It flows and adapts. It isn't carved in stone. This scares people who crave the absolute certainty of the old ways. They look at the fluidity of modern life and call it loneliness. But solitude and loneliness are different things. We are finding that people are perfectly capable of building deep, meaningful bonds without a steeple over their heads. In fact, without the pressure of eternal judgment hanging in the air, we might just be nicer to each other. Let's look at the data. If the hypothesis is religion is necessary for social health, then the most religious societies should be the healthiest, safest, and most cohesive. The least religious societies should be crumbling into anarchy. When you look at the map of the world, you see the exact opposite. The Scandinavian countries, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, are some of the most secular places on earth. Religion there is largely a cultural artifact, a backdrop for holidays, not a driver of daily life. Yet these nations consistently rank at the top of every index that matters: happiness, social trust, low crime rates, low corruption. They have strong social safety nets and high levels of civic engagement. People trust their neighbors, and they trust their government. They have built high-functioning communities without a fear of hellfire. Japan is another example. It has a very different cultural context, but it is similarly irreligious in the Western sense. The social fabric in Japan is incredibly tight. The sense of obligation to the community is massive. They have achieved this through shared cultural values and a sense of civic duty, not through dogmatic theism. This tells us something crucial. Societal health generates secularism, not the other way around. When life is precarious, when you don't know where your next meal is coming from, when the police are corrupt and the hospitals are empty, you turn to God. You need a miracle. You need a tribe that will defend you against the chaos. But when a society solves these problems, when you have stability, education, and security, religion naturally recedes. It becomes less useful. The glue in these secular societies is generalized trust. In a tribal religious community, trust is particular. I trust you because you are one of us. In a successful secular society, trust is general. I trust you because you are a fellow citizen. I assume you will follow the rules, stop at the red light, and return my wallet if I drop it, simply because that is the social contract we have all signed. This is a much more sophisticated form of community. It extends empathy beyond the tribe to the stranger. We also have to address the argument that religion provides meaning, and without it, communities fall into nihilism. This is a failure of imagination. Meaning is not something you find hidden in a text. It is something you create. Secular communities create meaning through action. Look at the environmental movement. This is a global community bound by a shared reverence for the planet and a responsibility to the future. It has its own rituals, its own saints, its own sacrifices, but it is based on science and tangible reality. Or look at the open source community in technology. Thousands of people collaborating for free to build tools for the world to use. They are driven by an ethos of contribution. The idea that we need a supernatural parent to give our lives weight is insulting to human agency. We are capable of deciding what matters to us. We are capable of protecting the weak, creating art, and exploring the universe without a mandate from above. In fact, secular ethics can be more robust because they are open to revision. When we base our community standards on reason and compassion, we can update them. We can admit we were wrong about something, like how we treat minorities or how we define marriage, and change course. Religious communities often struggle with this because their rules are supposed to be eternal and unchangeable. A community that cannot learn is a community that will eventually break. There is a distinct texture to secular connection that feels different from religious fellowship. It is often quieter. It doesn't announce itself with bells or chants. It happens in the spaces between things. Consider the concept of the third place. Sociologists talk about the home as the first place and work as the second. The third place is where community happens: the cafe, the park, the pub, the library, the gym. For centuries, religious buildings held a monopoly on the third place. If you wanted to see people, you went to the house of worship. Now, we are diversifying. The decline of the religious third place has caused some fragmentation. That is undeniable. We are currently in a transition period, an awkward adolescence of our species where we have left the parents' house but haven't quite figured out how to run our own apartment yet. We see this in the loneliness epidemic. But the cure isn't to move back in with the parents. The cure is to build better third places. We see successful secular communities forming around flow states. This is a psychological term for being completely immersed in an activity. Choirs, sports teams, maker spaces, gardening allotments. When people engage in a shared task that requires focus, barriers dissolve. You aren't a CEO or a janitor. You are just a tenor, or a right-winger, or a coder. This shared attention creates a bond that is incredibly strong. It mimics the trance states of religious ritual, but grounds it in skill and tangible achievement. There is also the power of shared narrative. Religion used to provide the only show in town for the grand story, where we came from and where we are going. Now, science provides a narrative that is arguably more majestic. The story of the cosmos, of evolution, of the incredible odds of our own existence. We are seeing communities form around this appreciation of reality. Stargazing parties, science festivals, philosophy meetups. These are people gathering to marvel at the mystery of existence without feeling the need to solve it with a myth. But we must be realistic. Secular community is harder. It requires effort. You don't just show up on Sunday and sit in a pew. You have to initiate. You have to organize. This friction is the filter. It means that the communities that do survive are the ones that people really want to be part of. They aren't default settings, they are choices. We also have to talk about the dark side of secular tribes. Without religion, people can turn politics into a religion. They can turn nutrition or crypto or a brand into a religion. We have that hardware in our brains that wants to worship, to categorize, to purge the non-believers. A secular society isn't immune to fanaticism. We have to remain vigilant against turning our new communities into cults without gods. The antidote to this is critical thinking, which is the bedrock of a healthy secular society. A religious community often prizes faith, belief without evidence. A rational community prizes skepticism, adjusting belief to fit the evidence. This makes the bonds more flexible. We can disagree and still be neighbors. We can have different views on tax policy or zoning laws without accusing each other of spiritual evil. Lowering the stakes from eternal damnation to disagreement actually makes living together much easier. So, where does this leave us? If we look at the long arc of history, we are moving from communities of necessity to communities of affinity. In the past, you were born into a village and a faith, and that was it. You didn't have a choice. You relied on that group for your physical survival. If you didn't like the rules, too bad. Now, in the developed world, we have the luxury of autonomy. We can choose where to live, who to love, and who to associate with. This freedom is terrifying to some. It looks like chaos, but it is actually a higher form of order. It allows for authentic connection. When you meet someone in a secular context who shares your values, you know it is real. They aren't there because of a threat of punishment or a promise of reward in the afterlife. They are there because they value the same things you do here and now. The future of community lies in intentionality. We are going to see more co-living arrangements, more neighborhood co-ops, more secular assemblies that borrow the good parts of church, the singing, the reflection, the tea and biscuits, without the dogma. We are seeing the rise of effective altruism, where people use reason and evidence to figure out how to do the most good with their resources. That is a community built on a desire to help, stripped of any theological baggage. We are also realizing that we need rituals. We need ways to mark birth, coming of age, marriage, and death. For a long time, secular people just borrowed the religious scripts because they didn't have their own. That is changing. We are writing new scripts. We are celebrating the solstice not because of sun gods, but because the turning of the seasons is a physical reality that affects us all. We are holding memorials that focus on the memory of the deceased rather than the journey of the soul. We are validating the human experience without needing to sanctify it. The ultimate argument for the survival of community without religion is simply this: we are human. We are the social animal. We cannot help but connect. It is impossible to suppress our urge to gather, to gossip, to build, to play. Religion was just one container for this urge, and for a long time it was the only one that could hold a large civilization. But the container is cracking. The water isn't spilling out and evaporating. It is flowing into new shapes. We are growing up. We are realizing that we don't need a parent figure in the sky to tell us to be nice to our siblings. We can look each other in the eye and realize that we are all we have. And that realization, that we are alone in a vast, indifferent universe, is actually the strongest bond of all. It makes every act of kindness, every moment of connection, infinitely more precious because it is finite. It matters because we make it matter. Community will not only survive without religion, it has the potential to thrive in ways we haven't even seen yet. It will be messier, yes. It will be louder and more argumentative, but it will be ours. It will be based on the truth of our condition, and that is a solid foundation to build on.